Good morning to all the folks on the West Coast, and for the rest of the country, good afternoon. I am George DeMarco, ESX Chair, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to all our listeners on today's ESX webinar, Uncovering the True Cost of Commercial Fire Systems. And I want to give a shout out to all the folks on the webinar. Thanks for taking the time today to sharpen your business and technical skills, allowing you to compete at a higher level. And of course, our goal is to provide as much information as we can in 60 minutes. If we go over by a few minutes, it's just to make sure that we answer as many questions for you as possible. As many of you know, the competitive and technological landscapes have dramatically shifted in the delivery of fire alarm systems, especially as it relates to the competition. But to be a better competitor, a better business operator, it is imperative for you to understand what it really takes to be profitable when specifying, installing, and maintaining fire alarm systems. Let's face it, competition in all areas of security and life safety services is fiercer than ever before. We need to take the competition seriously, but in addition, we need to be rigorous in uncovering the right components for operating a fire alarm business that leads to sustainable profits for the organization overall. So to have a meaningful conversation about uncovering the true cost of commercial fire systems, we brought together a terrific lineup of industry professionals who are willing to share their thoughts on this subject. From Hartford, Connecticut, Raymond, Vice President, Information Services for Associated Security Corporation, and we have Brandt, Phillips, Director of Commercial Fire and Security Sales for NAPCO Security Technologies. And again, I, George DeMarco, will be your moderator. Today's webinar is made possible by NAPCO Security Technologies commercial grade systems, and on behalf of ESX, we thank NAPCO for their sponsorship. In a moment, Brandt will be sharing his thoughts and solutions with us. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available for viewing on www.esxweb.com/webinars. And we encourage you to submit a question at any point during the presentation. Just click on questions in the webinar window, type in your question, and we'll have our panelists answer it at the Q&A part of the program after the presentation is completed. So here's the game plan. I will be asking questions of our panelists to get their opinions on the business of fire alarm systems. And what will we talk about? Here are a few learning objectives for today. Talking about the difference between conventional and addressable systems, why do conventional systems end up costing more, and what are the jurisdictions asking for? And what about ongoing inspections and service plays? How does that come into the equation? And of course, we encourage you to submit your questions to make sure we meet your learning objectives. Before I call up our sponsor, I would like to open with this quote I've used many times from Marcel Proust. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. This quote by Marcel tells us that meaningful discovery doesn't come from learning new things, but from discovering new aspects of things already familiar to us. As security and life safety professionals, we too must continually look at every aspect of our industry with fresh eyes, and it has never been more evident than in today's business environment. So with that, we have some cool presenters here today to share their thoughts and vision on fire alarms. Let's start by welcoming Brandt Phillips to talk about NAPCO's Firewolf and Gemini commercial grade products. Brandt, it's a pleasure to have you here today. You're on.
Thank you, George. I appreciate you and the ESA allowing us to return again as a sponsor. It's always a pleasure to work with the association. As George said, I represent NAPCO's Commercial Security and Fire Division, where we produce the industry's most flexible commercial series security and fire platforms. George, if you could go ahead and roll to the next slide, please. All right. Our commercial series of control panels were built from the ground up as 24-volt fire alarm systems with full conventional, addressable, and commercial-rated long-range wireless fire protection. George, you can roll again, please. We designed these systems in such a way that you can mix and match the type of initiating point technology that's appropriate for your application. Whether you need 2 addressable points and 50 conventional points combined with 150 wireless devices, we can accommodate that in really any configuration that suits your needs, anywhere from 32 points up to 255 points combined. George, you can roll again, please. As capable as they are powerful, NAPCO security products include support for 2 to 4 notification circuits out of the box with your choice of 4 to 6.5 amps of power. But we still offer enough expandability to take you into very large projects up to 24 NAC circuits with almost 40 amps of notification power. But we haven't forgotten about legacy installations. We even have selectable notification circuits that can be downgraded to 12 volt in select applications. Helps to lower the cost of upgrades in existing systems. George, you can roll again. As I mentioned a bit earlier, all of our systems, small or large, can be customized to suit your needs. Whether you need just a conventional small system for water flow applications, all the way up to 255 points of addressable fire, conventional fire, as well as up to 200 wireless points available as well. George, you can roll again. This series of panels doesn't stop just with fire. We do offer a fully isolated daughter board that we can add on to our Firewolf and Gemini commercial series of panels that add a fully isolated mercantile rated burglar alarm and access control system into the same enclosure. George, you can roll again. As we add intrusion and access control to these systems, we maintain full support for UL and NFPA regulations with complete isolation between the burglary and fire systems. That isolation includes separate communication buses, isolated programming, separate battery backup, as well as separate power supplies. So you maintain 2 functionally independent systems that happen to reside in the same box, puts you at a significant price advantage over just about any product out there on the market. George, you can go ahead and roll again. In addition to fire systems and integrated systems, we've also released a line of addressable burglary-only systems for large applications, complete with a tremendous amount of auxiliary power available for driving large systems with a number of different burglary points. Our Gemini burglary addressable systems even feature mercantile-rated wireless protection, which is a very unusual product in today's market. I'd like to thank you again, George, for having us as a sponsor, and we can go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation now.
Great, Brandt. Thanks very much. I really appreciate you being a sponsor. But before we leave you, what I really enjoy about having you participate in these webinars is your background. I just want to have them touch a little bit more on your background, that you've been kind of on both sides of the table. If you can just give us a little bit more insight to that, that'd be great.
Sure. No, absolutely. I am actually 3rd generation in the security industry. My daycare, starting out as a young child, was actually a warehouse full of alarm equipment. As I grew a little older, I spent quite a bit of time in my family's central station, as well as installing. I have owned and operated numerous alarm companies that I've built up and sold off to some of the national outfits. And for about the last, I guess, 12 years now, I've been concentrating on the manufacturing side of the business. So I've really been involved in just about every aspect, from installation to core commercial sales to executive management to engineering.
Great. I really appreciate it. Faraz, I'd like you to do the same thing, but obviously get a little bit of your background and a little bit of what your company focuses on too from the fire alarm industry aspect. And what I'd like
Thank
to
you,
do
George.
too is, sorry, Faraz, I just stepped over you, but I want to also introduce you officially. Let's put your great looking picture up there and your logo and everything. So there you go. Now we're all set.
Hey everybody, my name is Raymond. I'm from Associated Security. We are a dealer out of Hartford, Connecticut. We've been around for 40+ years. We have our own central station and we do it all. We do access control, we do intrusion, we do fire, life safety, most importantly, as well as monitoring at our own in-house central station. It's second generation strong, it's family owned. We're one of the largest privately owned alarm companies in Connecticut. And I'm glad to be here to have this opportunity with George and the other panelists here.
Great. And just to everybody, if just give me a real quick background on me. My former company, Greater Alarm, we had 6 different divisions that covered everything from residential to high-rise fire and everything in between. And we had 6 branches. Had a lot of experience on the fire side. The quick story that I have is the way we got into fire, and I hope most people don't do this, but the way we got in fire was we were doing residential application on a multifamily home, and a building inspector walked up to the building and said, "Where's your fire alarm system?" to the contractor, the builder, and he says, "What fire alarm system?" And they turned to me and they said, "Hey, do you do fire alarm systems?" And I said, "Yes, no problem." Just being the crazy entrepreneur I am. Next thing you know, as we became fairly well known as far as doing fire systems in the California area. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and we're going to do a deeper dive now into the session's main content, and we're going to be asking a lot of questions of especially of Faraz, because he is on the ground, he has boots on the ground, he's got a lot of input that is going to be very helpful to everybody. So what, in your opinion, and this actually question can go to both of you, both Brandt and Faraz, why are conventional systems a shrinking market, in your opinion? Faraz, could you take that first, and then we'll go to Brandt?
Yes, conventional fire systems, and that is a good point you made right there. Why are they shrinking in this market? Because of the technology available with Addressable, being able to give point-to-point identification of where a smoke alarm or any other fire device is active. Also, understanding the true idea behind Addressable is the service and the labor behind it. For a lot of us, how many of us remember working on that old fire panel dating back to even the 60s and 70s when you had one continuous loop go out throughout the entire building? And if any of the techs can go back like I can and say, well, we had that one thumber rule, divide and conquer. You go out there with a multimeter and you figure it out. That can be very costly to a customer. However, with Addressable, the great beauty is, I mean, it's getting more popular just for the fact of the labor it saves on working on one.
Great. And Brandt, from your perspective, from the manufacturer's perspective, what are you seeing?
What we're seeing, labor and system cost is a huge part of that. As was mentioned, the price of labor, especially in overhead, is through the roof today. In addition to that, the price of copper that we need for wire has doubled and tripled in certain types of wire over the last few years. It's really driven up the hardware costs, because with a conventional system today, we're home running zone after zone after zone back to the system on a dedicated pair of wire, oftentimes through Conduit. It doesn't make a lot of sense today. In addition, the cost of addressable systems has come down so dramatically over the last couple of years that they're much more affordable for most applications. The other area is the amount of support after the fact that's required on a conventional system. I think later today we'll be talking about inspections and sensitivity testing. That's been one of the biggest areas. It's been a thorn in most dealers' sides, and that's done the sensitivity testing on a conventional system, because it takes a lot of time and requires some expensive hardware to perform that.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to remind everybody, as we're starting off the questions here, there is an answer. There's a question window so when we get to that part of the webinar, we'll be looking for your questions to directly ask of our panelists here. Okay, the next question is, and I think Brandt, you just obviously touched on this, but I really want to get Faraz's point of view here. How are rising wire, conduit, labor costs overshadowing any savings on conventional systems? I remember living and breathing this when I had my company, how expensive it was. But if you can give us a sense of your take on it.
No, definitely. A lot of times with an addressable system, you can run two types of loops. You can run a Class A or Class B. And if you were to do a Class A on a conventional system, oh boy, God bless you, because you're going to be running a lot of wire all the way around.
Yeah.
Now with addressable, the labor costs, of course, instead of having like 3 to 4 guys on a fire job, now you can technically have 1 or 2 guys doing it together. Or even if you did have 3 to 4 guys, the same amount of manpower, you would notice that it would go much quicker because you're just going in and out of each device and addressing each device, so that way it's easier to track down. The cost goes down, especially on conduit and wire, like you mentioned. Copper has gone up. It's almost doubled and tripled the pricing. And conventional systems as it is, it's just you got a lot of wire, you got a lot more, when you have a lot more as far as how many devices can be on a certain loop or a zone. So with addressable, you have much more expandability on that concept of being able to add addressable devices that are very low on power consumption, especially your phones.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, let's shoot to the next question. Why are the applications? What are the applications where conventional systems are still viable today? Because not every system is a huge system. There are some systems that are very small, and I'm assuming that you have certain applications for it. Yeah, Faraz, if you can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, our company, we do still use conventional systems, and where are we doing them? We're doing them at the small mom and pops locations. We're doing them in the small bakeries or a very small business, I would say. Very popular here in Connecticut by per code. Multi-dwelling homes, if it's a 3-family house, that's where we might use a small conventional fire alarm system, where you don't have so many devices.
And Brandt, from your perspective, from a manufacturing perspective, do you have some percentages, or do you have something that you can give us to sink our teeth in as far as how it's being compared from conventional to addressable systems today as far as applications?
Sure. Based on our analysis of what we sell, the conventional systems market for us is about 25% of overall system sales. And the majority of those seem to come from existing systems that are being upgraded. Where that's been valuable to us is we do make a conventional fire system that has additional capabilities such as wireless protection. So as AHJs are coming into certain applications and they say, hey guys, sorry to break it to you, but you're not grandfathering anymore and require additional protection, it's the most cost-effective way of pulling out an old panel, reusing as many of the devices and wiring as possible, and adding a little bit of protection here or there as required.
Great. Okay, let's. So this was placed in here. This general rule that Brandt sent me. I thought I'd put it in there, but can you speak to that a little bit, Brandt, of why you threw that at me?
Sure. Well, in general, commercial conventional systems, since they have been falling from favor with most jurisdictions and fire marshals and AHJs, manufacturers have typically responded by ceasing engineering on most of the newer conventional systems because they're just not as practical today. So what I see is available out there as a general whole, industry-wide, ranges from about 8 to 32 zones of conventional fire. If we look at applications that are larger than that, you're almost always going to need to use an addressable system.
Okay, that's a good rule, general rule of thumb. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to switch now to addressable systems. A few questions in that area. So, why are addressable fire systems setting the standards for fire systems today? Faraz?
I believe so with the technology that we have available for addressable. The most important thing I find with a lot of my clients and AHJs is being able to give them the information the client needs. And that's something as simple as, especially on an APCO panel, using the quick loader software, uploading it, and being able to even just export the log and send it to the AHJ or the client, which we could also talk later on, also with the sensitivity testing you can do with the same way on a lot of those addressable systems out there. But the most important thing is, I'm sure a lot of you who deal with the authority having jurisdiction or the fire marshals of today, they're looking at the addressable systems. Why? Because it's giving them more information that they need to be able to be as efficient as they can.
Great. Okay, so on this question here, we want each one of you to give kind of examples of installation differences between conventional and addressable systems. But why are addressable systems costing less to install and providing better profit margins? Brandt, I'm going to let you take this from your perspective, and then obviously for us, I'm going to let you answer that too.
Thank you. Well, quite often I am called in with our dealer base to help them lay out systems. And we always weigh the different options, be it conventional, addressable, wireless, or a combination of them. And there's been a general thought process over the last few years that since conventional systems are less expensive typically for the hardware, that's where a lot of dealers like to lead that direction. So we sit down with a lot of dealers and really look at the actual labor, the actual wire, and the parts and pieces start to finish to see what a real cost of a system is. I had an example a couple of weeks ago. A customer of mine had approached me where all they needed to do was provide a very small fire system. So I believe it was about 8 zones or 8 points of fire. The dealer wanted to use a conventional system until we actually sat down and we looked at the volume of wire, because he had a sprinkler riser with the flow switch and a gate valve. He had a post indicator valve out across the parking lot, a handful of pull stations, a couple of smoke detectors, and of course notification devices. As we sat down and we looked at, especially the sprinkler riser, which was about 50 feet across an open warehouse, would have required a genie lift, conduit and dedicated wires for both the sprinkler zone, the flow zone, and the gate valve zone. In addition, there was also a pull station right next to the sprinkler riser for an employee exit. That was six conductors that were having to run back to the panel all the way from the back of this warehouse. That required a large gauge of conduit. We actually had to run a 1-inch conduit as opposed to a 3/4-inch conduit, which increased the cost. Six conductors through that conduit as opposed to 2 conductors through that conduit. And we sat down and looked at the labor cost of pulling those 6 wires versus a pair. It was a dramatic difference, and I find that to be more the rule than anything else. That sheer volume of wire and the time it takes to manipulate it quickly erodes any savings there is on a conventional panel. It takes a lot of hours of saved labor it doesn't take a lot of wasted labor to overshadow any savings on a conventional panel. The difference that we normally see is $50 to $150 difference for a conventional panel versus a addressable panel. A couple extra dollars for modules, but when you factor in 2 extra hours of labor, that eats up the savings right there just in that warehouse.
Gotcha. Faraz?
I've actually used an example a couple of weeks ago. Our company was doing a fire system for a multi-unit plaza, and the landlord had told me we want to make sure we're able to identify each device or each point, because his biggest issue was with conventional that the other alarm company that was in there, they would spend hours and it would upset the tenants saying they're looking for the issue or where it is on the loop. And obviously as an installation thing, if we were to install a newer conventional system, like Brent just mentioned, it would take hours more than to run 1 or 2 devices out. You could actually just have it hooked up to the addressable loop, and now you're making it part of the fire alarm family. So that's where we used examples of addressable being better than conventional on the cost-saving idea, especially in these plazas that we bump into every now and then. Being able to say, all right, well, we can use the existing wiring. If we swap out the device, we won't have to run all these wires back or hook them up or series them in. And this way also, we're able to keep it as a separate point, so it's better and easier for identification.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that I obviously point out, I'm not the expert definitely on fire alarm systems, but one of the things I used to watch very closely was the labor, because it was such a huge variable, you know, when you're completing any type of installation. But I used to track the labor pretty closely to make sure that it was within tolerance or within tolerance of a job, because if the labor gets out of control, then obviously your profits go way down. So you really need to focus on that labor to make sure it stays within tolerance, so that your profit margins remain intact. Okay, let's go to the next question. Oops. There we go. What are the applications best suited for addressable systems today? Faraz?
The best applications I can say is definitely in Connecticut alone, especially with the schools and what's happened in the past 2 years. I think everyone knows of. They're looking into a lot with life safety and fire alarm systems, and the biggest thing I see is your large applications work out great and beautiful for addressable. In many ways, obviously the installation costs of retrofitting a system works out perfect, as well as the labor, and if you have customers out there that, like we do, that we have to provide service contracts to. If we're providing service contracts to maintain a system, if we do an addressable system, by many ways it's so much easier, as well as the price point. We're not worried about having a guy out there for 12, 15 hours trying to figure out what's going on with Zone 5, where a point-on-point, even using isolation modules on an addressable system, can help us identify an issue in a quarter of that time or less.
For us, I just want to interrupt you just for 1 second. I just want to make sure everybody's up to speed on it. You said what has been happening in Connecticut. Everybody knows what's been happening in Connecticut. Can you just touch on that with the school system?
Yes.
Just touch on that, because some people might not know what's going on there.
In the past 2 years, Connecticut has been very, very proactive in their security for their schools, and that's all reaching out from life safety to access control being very more popular, as well as having more and more cameras, everything else put together. And what we've done is we've used a lot of the GEM-C products in a lot of schools, especially because they had an infrastructure of an older system that was there. We were able to upgrade it with all the grants coming in, and we were able to integrate the access control. In Connecticut, lockdown systems are probably the biggest thing that are happening in the education side of it. And the biggest thing with addressable was, with my customers, was the fact that I can deliver information right on the spot for them. That I can actually call into a addressable fire system, look up the exact points, see the status of the points. Is a device missing, or what's going on with it, or if there's a dirty smoke, which a lot of times when it comes to sensitive accounts of ours, school districts, town municipalities, we do a lot of work with police departments as well, they want to know what's going on as soon as possible. And being able to provide that information at a quick response, it lets us be able to do our job and make us more successful at what we do. And that's the biggest deal that I find with addressable, especially, like I said, service contracts. When I'm out there on a sales call and I'm giving these guys a service contract, I'm hoping that, obviously everything goes in well, everything gets done correctly, and you never have problems. But it's not a perfect world, everyone. We know that. And every now and then we realize we might have had a service contract out there, and I don't know how many of you have actually been through it, but you realize you might have lost money that 1 year because of a few issues that might have occurred.
Great, thank you.
So now diagnostics.
Yes, we're going to be talking about that just shortly, but we're going to go to the next slide, because we're going to be talking about the real cost, understanding the real cost when it comes to systems here. So Brandt, I'm going to, you gave me this fact here: addressable system hardware often costs about 20 to 30% more than an equally sized conventional system, right? However, give us the however.
The however is, as we've been discussing today, there's a lot more to the cost of a system than just one component. Equipment is a factor, but as we all know, equipment is a fairly fixed cost. The variable is the environmental situation and running cable, the cost of labor. That's where projects get out of control. Yes, it is a fairly well accepted fact that an addressable panel is usually 20 to 30% more than a conventional device. An addressable initiating point like a smoke detector does cost a couple of dollars more than a quality conventional smoke detector. But we find that you will typically save money in most applications going with addressable because of the labor and wiring savings.
Yeah, and for us, the next statement says that we often save 50% in labor, 2 to 20 hours. I'm sure that is, depends on the size of the system. And of course, we're looking at 50 to 80% in wiring conduit. Do you agree or don't agree with this statement?
I do agree with it because a lot of times that I've used addressable, especially retrofits, if we were to add more devices to a conventional system, the wiring and conduit costs would be so high, equivalent to almost as much as labor, obviously, too. With addressable, if I can say to my client saying, if I can do addressable, I can just add on to this loop instead of having everything home ran back to the panel. Because usually the customer likes to have everything home ran back to the panel. Why? Because it gives you a specific area. And obviously we want that, especially when it comes to life safety. But with an addressable point, I can do the same thing for half the price.
Got it. And this is another fact that we had come across, and I'd like Brandt to talk about this for a second, but a conventional system that saves $50 in hardware, usually the cost usually increases installation costs by $100 or more. Expound upon that a little bit.
Yeah, this was actually geared at the smaller systems. Let's say the 32-point or 32-zone maximum capacity small systems that we see in, in a small mom-and-pop application, small store, small retail application. There's not a huge cost difference, and if we look at $50 in hardware, we find with just the wiring differences and the amount of time that's needed, just the man hours, typically are going to cost most of us anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half of additional labor, just at the panel, just making all these multiple connections for the different zones.
Got it. Let's go. Now we're going to talk about technological advantages of addressable systems. So let's start off with, this is probably, Ron, I'm sure you can talk about this like you're looking at the back of your hand. Why do most A&Es and AHJs and fire department first responders prefer addressable systems over conventional systems?
Well, that's exactly the biggest thing with fire marshals is I've dealt with my fine share, and I bet a lot of people, a lot of you on here have too, is when they arrive to a fire call, what's the first thing they want to know? Where are we going? And how many times have we been to a fire job and we notice that if we're doing a retrofit or an upgrade, we notice if it's a conventional panel that the labels are falling off, or it's not saying zone 4, and that's that mystery zone that no one knows about. AHJs and fire departments, the biggest thing with adjustable is, like I said, it's point to point. A lot of your adjustable systems out there, you're able to actually give it a description on a LCD keypad that shows the first responders of exactly where to go in the case of a fire or a smoke alarm activation. The other thing with the AHJs is the idea of a lot of the new adjustable systems, they're able to give you reports on the spot. I actually bumped into an AHJ last week in a town where we did a 82-unit apartment building, and you said, I said, here, Mr. AHJ, this is the NFPA paperwork, well, the sensitivity report and everything. He said, well, how about after 2 months you give me another sensitivity report? And I said, no problem. And this goes back to the labor side. I don't have to send a tech out from our company to get it. I can actually have it uploaded right into my central station, be able to view that report and send it out to them. So the ongoing cost I also find very important for our company, and the reason why we choose to do addressable in a lot of our fire applications.
Right, and you touched on that. I'm going to let you answer this question too, but what are the daily operating advantages of an addressable system versus the conventional too? You've touched on it, but a little deeper dive on that.
The deeper dive on this is you have everything available, where I remember, say, 15, 20 years ago, where we would have to send a tech out for every little thing. Now I don't have to roll a truck. I can do things remotely. And the biggest thing is the daily operating advantages of this, and I'll give you guys a little secret, is that we can actually charge for this. And you know, we are in the alarm industry. Recurring revenue is how we make our bread and butter. Well, one thing I'll present to my clients a lot of times is if I can give you a monthly or actually a quarterly report on how your fire system's doing, give you sensitivity readings, tell you if it's time, hey, we're going to be doing your inspections, I would recommend replacing these smoke detectors. They're coming to their stage. It's giving me more abilities to actually make revenue off of this now. With the newer fire addressable systems, the software is amazing to the extent where I can upload everything in the comfort of my own office and be able to print it out, fax it, email it, or even send a simple PDF version of it or an XPS file. So it really pays off if you actually look into the idea of being able to sell the product in a sense that you can provide your clientele with vital information that a lot of times I find popular in schools right now, especially with the fact of the awareness of how important life safety has become. Also, as well as your municipalities that are willing to pay for this and larger businesses. And actually, I've dealt with high government buildings with high-end insurance policies. It lets the customer be able to smooth it over with their insurance company saying that they're going above and beyond, which is actually worth the money to pay a company like ours to do this service for.
That's awesome, because you're really talking about it's a kind of a form of an interactive service that really causes recurring revenue and other service revenue to be generated as a result of having addressable systems. I like the sound of that, and I think the industry loves the sound of that too. Let's.
It's one of the best things I can do.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying it's one of the best things you can have available, but especially, like, just one more thing, I'm going to make it real quick.
Sure.
How many of us send out technicians on emergency fire calls? I know I send my team out there, and they're walking in blind. If I can aware them, hey, there's a smoke detector that's showing a problem on the software itself, they're ready to go. They have the right part in their vehicle. They're headed down there. They're able to take care of it in no time at all. So that's another advantage I want everyone to think of as well.
What you're basically saying is you're being proactive and you're creating a better customer experience for your clients. So that's great.
Exactly.
So, Brandt, I'm going to let you take this one. What are the long-term stability and false alarm dispatch resistance of drift compensation versus fire verification?
Well, to really understand this point, George, we really need to look at the technology difference between addressable and conventional systems. When we look at a conventional system, we have a smoke detector out in the field somewhere that was designed to respond to some criteria that an engineer somewhere designed into that detector. And we have no control over how sensitive that detector is, how quickly it's going to respond. So the industry, to help cut down on false alarms, especially false alarms related to dust, dirt, and other contaminants that find their way into detectors, was to implement a function called fire verification. Most of us are familiar with this on our older fire systems and a lot of residential systems that we may have smoke detectors installed, where if there's a disturbance, the system sees the alarm on the smoke detector. It then powers down the smoke detector, basically does a reset, powers back up, and then waits to see if there's going to be another alarm that's initiated on that smoke detector, typically within the next minute. It's a nice concept, but it really doesn't address the underlying issue, which is usually the detector getting dirty. When we look at how an addressable system, on the other hand, especially an analog addressable system, functions, the detectors are just data collectors. All they're doing is they're telling the alarm system, the fire alarm panel, exactly what they see. For example, I see this much obscuration of the light internally in my detector. The system responds based on how the technician programmed the system. So if we go into an area that's an entryway to a commercial building that has a lot of traffic, a lot of potential dust and dirt that's being stirred up, during the installation or even after the installation, we can recalibrate the smoke detector and adjust its sensitivity. Perhaps we reduce its sensitivity by 0.5%. It'll still keep it in the UL and NFPA accepted range, but make it a little less sensitive for some of those hiccups and environmental issues that occur. That's one portion of it. That really helps to cut down on the false dispatches. The second portion of it is an embedded function of analog addressable systems that's known as drift compensation. This is probably one of the most effective false alarm reduction tools out there. Since an addressable detector is in communications with the panel all the time, the panel knows the exact status and sensitivity of the device. And over a period of time, it can track how dirty that detector is getting. The problem is when a detector starts getting dirty, it either starts getting more sensitive or less sensitive, either not going to respond to a fire as it should, or becomes a false alarm nightmare. Drift compensation allows the panel to automatically change the sensitivity of the detector on the fly because it always knows. It knows 10 minutes ago I saw X amount of dust and I've increased slightly to a different level. It can recalibrate every couple of hours based on the environmental issues. And that translates into a much more stable system over the long term.
Great. That I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would like to know more about that. But we need to move on because we have a lot of questions that we got to get to. So the costs. Let's talk about the costs after the sale. So, Franz, do most jurisdictions require annual sensitivity testing, in your opinion, at least in Connecticut, within your known universe?
Yes, especially the fact that Connecticut just adopted a new NFPA 2010-72, actually, and NEC we adopted 2011. So with the new code intact, the Connecticut really is requiring annual sensitivity testing, especially in your certain occupancies. They're really being strict on it, and that's some of the things that we look into, being able to provide our customers, so that way it's not a a point where we have to come out there and go to each device and with a little tool and test each one for sensitivity, see if it passes or fails.
Yeah, so I want you to take this one too, but what steps and tools are necessary to generate sensitivity testing in a conventional system? In addition to the functional tests, how much extra time is required to perform these tests and generate those reports?
Well, just think about it. I mean, a lot of us, we know you have to pay one of your techs to go all the way out there to be able to stand there and use certain devices or tools, per se, with certain smoke detectors. And, throughout the years of us being in business, especially our company for 40 years, we've ran across a lot of smoke detectors where, it comes to the point, I think one of my techs has 5 different sensitivity testers in his vehicle. The biggest thing with a sensitivity testing is the amount of time we're spending and how much we can charge for it. When we're realizing in our industry that the competition is fierce. How can we compete? How can we still make a profit and be able to do this when we could just easily call into a system over the computer or over your central station to be able to take a look at what's going on with the sensitivity and be able to send those reports out?
Great. And I'm going to have Brandt take this one. How do analog addressable systems deal with automatic sensitivity testing reporting?
I'd love to jump on that. Before I do, I'd like to ask a question. Sure. You mentioned a lot of sensitivity testers on your technician's truck. How much do those sensitivity testers cost?
Oh, good God. We are looking anywhere from 100 plus. Okay. And that's usually, I get that price because sometimes, we have enough purchased where they'll give us to a decent deal, but it still doesn't rectify the fact that my guys have to have 5 different testers with 9-volt batteries or AA batteries. It's just,
yeah.
I'll be honest, like any other company, have I gotten a technician going out there and saying, oh yeah, my sensitivity tester, I can't find it, or I don't have a pole large enough, I don't have a pole large enough to be able to reach the smoke detector, or we need a lift, or we need special equipment, or I need a certain type of A-frame ladder? Yeah, I mean, that's the fallback of doing a sensitivity test on a conventional system versus addressable.
Thank you. Well, when we talk about analog addressable systems, since the panel is always in communications with the detectors, the system always knows the sensitivity on the devices. So to run an equivalent test, in the NAPCO world, for example, we would plug our laptop right into the panel and simply upload the status, or can even connect to it remotely via a cellular communicator, IP communicator, phone line, and extract those statuses right from the system without rolling a truck, without going on site. The programming software that we use to actually configure the system actually stores all of the current sensitivity values from the last time it spoke to the system internally, right in that software. So it's a couple of key presses, takes maybe 5 minutes over a phone line, and that's really kind of a stretch even. But there's not an excessive cost or time requirement related to that.
Great, thank you. So let's recap this, what we just went over, addressable versus conventional systems. We talked about it's better technology. We talked about that it saves money, reduces installation costs. The labor costs are tremendous, trying to keep those in control. Depending on the size of the installation, the size of the building, that can actually add up to be a lot. Service and inspection costs, we talked about that, how we can greatly reduce it by having addressable systems. Generates higher profits. That's always music to everybody's ears. But we also discussed conventional systems are not totally outdated. They're not going away because there's appropriate applications for it, water flow systems and other extremely small systems. And they all contribute to increased sales. That's good news. But the increased sales should generate higher profits, both from a bottom line, from an installation perspective, service perspective, but also from a recurring revenue perspective. So with that, we are going to go, we got a lot of questions that have come in, and we're going to go to the Q&A, and I really appreciate you guys giving a lot of great input so far. So let's ask a few questions, and the first one's going to go to Brandt. And this question says, do you see a growth of wireless systems, and do you feel that they are better than conventional systems?
That's actually a great question. We've been producing wireless fire products for close to 5 years now, and it was a slow start. There was a lot of education that was necessary of jurisdictions and even fire systems dealers. As we have educated the industry and as more manufacturers have started to jump on the bandwagon, we've seen a much greater acceptance. And they're selling a lot more now than they ever had in the past, and they're becoming a very viable option. That's not a battle, and that was one of the things we suffered through early on, was fighting different AHJs where they said, "Oh, you can't have wireless smoke detectors. That's residential." We're past that now, and we don't have a lot of objections to it. When we look at the practicality of wireless, we need to put it in perspective, because we're looking at wireless initiating points. Smoke detectors, heat detectors, flow switches, gate valves, other dry contacts like that. You save a lot of labor by installing wireless products, but it's not an end-all. There's still going to be wiring that's pulled, and you can't cover an entire fire system wirelessly today.
Gotcha. So here's another question for you too, Brandt. It says conventional systems are great for daycare, schools, and sprinkler systems. Are there not a few conventional zones on addressable panels NAPCO cells?
All of my systems can be equipped with conventional zones, strictly wireless or strictly addressable, or any combination of these. Typically, the majority of my addressable systems, or my fire systems, are typically addressable out of the box, but there are very inexpensive modules that can get plugged right into the system to give you 8 conventional 2-wire fire zones.
Gotcha. Thank you for that one. Then I have a comment that was made here. It says drift compensation and verification features are not mutually exclusive. I don't know who wants to take that one, but that's just a comment that somebody sent in.
Drift compensation and features like that are typically found on almost all addressable fire panels today, but typically not found on conventional systems. So I'm not sure if that's what the comment was directed at.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I'm just trying to see if there is, but I don't see it there. So not all addressable systems are analog intelligent addressable systems, guys. So that's a comment somebody made too. Brandt, do you want to take that one?
Certainly. When we talk about addressable, and we look just generically at addressable, what does addressable mean? Addressable means when X device goes off, the system knows that it was X device. In a lot of burglar alarm-based combo systems and burglar alarm-based small fire systems, there are devices that essentially have, call it a single conventional zone expander inside of a smoke or a heat or a pull station that works just like any other conventional zone. Has an end-of-line resistor typically internal to the circuitry, and it's able to monitor things like a short or an open or sometimes a dirty signal. When we talk about really the core systems market in the fire alarm, that's analog addressable. Analog addressable is that true data exchange that we were talking about, where the devices, the smoke detectors, the heat detectors, are a data collector just telling the panel what's happening in the field, allowing it to make decisions. The other is known as digital addressable, and it works, as I said, exactly like a conventional zone does. No adjustability, no flexibility. It's just a point ID-based style of system.
Got it. And we have another question that is the 20 to 30%, and I'm thinking that it's referring to the cost of the equipment, including the notification appliances or just the addressable detectors as far as the extra cost versus conventional versus addressable. I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can jump on that one.
Sure.
When we look at notification, a notification device is a notification device. NAPCO, as an example, we work with both Wheelock and system sensor notification appliances. It really makes no difference whether you're looking at addressable or conventional. Notification is the exact same devices regardless of what initiating style you use.
Got it. So we have another comment too. It says that we still need the ladder to prove smoke entry, even if the panel gives the sensitivity levels for you. I don't know, Faraz, I don't know if you want to take that one, but could you comment on that comment? Or Brandt?
Sure, I mean, if you're doing like if you look at a lot of addressable fire alarm systems now, you do smoke entry because they don't even give you the option to actually, let's say call it pop it as smoke or press a little button into it or use a magnet. So a lot of times, yes, I guess you do need a ladder for certain smoke entry, but for sensitivity levels, as more than anything, you're able to get that report right from the panel where you don't have to use a special tool for it. I think that was more of the point of the question that we were trying to play out there.
The point that gets overlooked quite often is, yes, we have to test all devices, depending on the jurisdiction. It may be quarterly, it may be annually. We must do a functional test, which is the smoke entry. What we're looking at with the sensitivity testing is the extra steps beyond that functional test and the reduction in labor and reduction of cost to the customer.
Gotcha. By the way, I have a comment from someone who came out there that says, great answer, guys. Brandt, great answers. So what I'd like to one last question I'd like to ask Faraz about is, I know in California there's some pretty stringent laws that are around installing fire alarm systems from the company who is obviously the contractor but also it goes all the way down to the fire alarm installer. In Connecticut, is there any? What are the requirements as far as being a fire alarm installation company and being a technician?
Well, in Connecticut, you have to have a license to do fire alarm installation, which covers low voltage. For everything else, it's not like some of the other states where you have to have multiple different licenses for every little thing you're doing. Like Massachusetts requires to have a separate S license just for security as well. More importantly, in Connecticut, the biggest thing that's looked at is when a installation or you're pulling a permit, there's always a walkthrough with the AHJ, and usually that's when you have to make sure you have all your cut sheets in order. So when doing a newer type of system, and I just want to, I know I'm going off topic, but I did do a wireless GEM-C fire panel a little while back, and the biggest thing was the AHJ was not fully educated on that. So in Connecticut, really, I mean, sometimes it's a learning curve for some of these guys, but with the way things are moving into the industry at a newer level of understanding of what fire is now, it's much better to be able to actually sit down with the AHJ and sit down and say, okay, this is what's going on, this is what we're planning to do, and whatnot. So that is kind of, I consider a requirement, because our company would just practice that just for good business reasons.
Yeah, and I think that's great. My last story about AHJ, my first experience with an AHJ is, remember way back when I was talking about my experience as far as entering the fire alarm business. On a Friday, I found out that I was going to be doing this fire alarm system, so I called up the AHJ to have a Monday appointment, and when the first thing he did when he came out onto the site is his hand reached out to me and he says, great to meet you, George. I have a confession to make. This is my first day on the job. And I looked at him and I said, guess what? I have a confession to make too. It's my first day on the job. It's very important. What he said was to make sure that you have a great relationship with the AHJ and know what you're up against so that you can obviously install the systems correctly and meet the codes. Anyway, I'd like to thank our presenters and to NAPCO for making this webinar a success. And I just want to let you guys know that now it's my turn to do some commercials here. The learning doesn't have to stop here. I want you to be sure to attend ESX 2015 and to gain the business intelligence necessary to compete in today's marketplace. This year's central theme for the educational tracks is to help security and fire life safety professionals better run their companies, grow their businesses, maximize their central stations, and rethink the future. Here's a sampling of a few sessions that will be offered at ESX, from building a fire life safety business to figuring out what's next for your business in the coming years. So you're probably thinking, why go to ESX? At ESX, we are very focused on delivering relevant content that is designed exclusively for security, life safety, and monitoring companies. From dynamic networking events, thought-provoking and actionable educational sessions, to a vibrant exhibit hall, ESX provides an ecosystem to help you grow professionally, discover best practices, and remain relevant in the security and life safety industry. Speaking of ESX, June is just around the corner, so it's a great time to lock in your registration and savings for ESX 2015, being held June 24th through the 26th in Baltimore. By the way, you can take advantage of the Super Saver rates if you register prior to April 30th. So head to esxweb.com now and register for ESX 2015 as soon as this webinar is complete. The website provides information on pass types, hotels, airline discounts, and of course, all the intel on educational sessions, networking and main stage events, exhibitors, and more. If you would like to review this session again, the recording of this webinar will be made available on www.esxweb.com/webinars in the coming days. Again, thank you to the presenters, and thank you for all attending today's session. And we look forward to seeing you and your team at ESX 2015 in Baltimore. This concludes today's webinar.